The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the sterile conference room. Clara's hands trembled as they clutched the edges of the cold metal table in front of her. Across from her sat 3 men in tailored suits, faces grim, arms crossed like barricades between them and whatever truth she was about to deliver. The air smelled faintly of coffee gone cold and desperation that had been simmering for weeks. "You're telling us," one of them finally said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through glass, "that you won't do it? That you refuse?" Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the water bottle sitting untouched beside her. She nodded once, firmly. "I'm not doing unpaid overtime anymore," she replied, her voice steady even though her heart pounded so loudly she feared everyone could hear it. "It's not fair. It never has been." The man leaned back in his chair, disbelief twisting his features into something ugly. "Fair?" he repeated, almost laughing. "Do you think this company became what it is by worrying about fair? You've been here 20 years, Clara. 20 years. And now when we need you most, you draw a line." She didn't flinch. Not this time. For too long, she'd let their demands roll over her like waves crashing against rocks, relentless, unyielding, destructive. But today felt different. Today she stood tall, even if it meant walking away from everything she'd built. "I've given more than my share," she said quietly, meeting his gaze head-on. Her brown eyes, usually warm and inviting, were steely now. "More hours, more effort, more loyalty than anyone else in this building. I've earned every penny they pay me, and then some. If asking for fairness makes me unreasonable, then maybe I don't belong here after all." There was silence for a moment, heavy and suffocating, before another man spoke up. His tone dripped with condescension. "You're replaceable, you know. There are plenty of others who would jump at the chance to take your place." Her stomach churned at the words, but she refused to let them see her falter. Instead, she rose slowly from her seat, gathering her notebook and pen with deliberate calm. "Then find someone else," she said simply, turning toward the door. Before stepping out, she paused just long enough to add, "But don't come crying to me when things fall apart without me holding it all together." And with that, Clara walked out of the room, leaving behind decades of dedication, countless late nights, and a part of herself she wasn't sure she'd ever get back. 3 months earlier, life looked very different for Clara. Back then, she still believed in the illusion of stability, the idea that hard work and loyalty would always be rewarded, that sacrifices made in silence would eventually earn recognition. As the senior project manager at Brightline Tech, a mid-sized software development firm known for its innovative solutions, Clara had spent nearly half her life climbing the ranks. From intern to team lead to department head, she'd poured every ounce of energy into making the company successful. Brightline prided itself on being ahead of the curve, leveraging cutting-edge technology to solve real-world problems. Their flagship product, an AI-driven analytics platform called Lumina, had garnered attention from investors and competitors alike. But behind the sleek marketing campaigns and glowing press releases lay a fragile foundation, a skeleton crew stretched thin, constantly scrambling to meet impossible deadlines while upper management demanded perfection without providing adequate resources. For Clara, this reality hit hardest during crunch times. Every quarter seemed to bring another emergency, requiring her team to pull double shifts, skip weekends, and push themselves beyond reasonable limits. At first, she justified it as necessary sacrifice. After all, startups thrived on hustle culture, right? Over time, however, the cracks began to show. Team members burned out, morale plummeted, and turnover rates skyrocketed. Yet whenever Clara tried to address these issues with leadership, she was met with dismissive platitudes or outright hostility. Still, she stayed. Why wouldn't she? After 2 decades, Brightline wasn't just her employer, it was her identity. Her colleagues weren't merely co-workers, they were family. Even when frustration bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to boil over, she reminded herself of the good days, the breakthroughs, the celebrations, the sense of accomplishment that came from creating something meaningful. But lately, those memories felt distant, overshadowed by resentment and exhaustion. Lately, the scales had tipped too far, and no matter how much weight she added to one side, balance remained elusive. It started with small things, emails ignored, requests denied, promises broken. Then came larger indignities, budget cuts that left essential tools outdated, mandatory training sessions scheduled during lunch breaks, and increasingly frequent demands for unpaid overtime. Each new offense chipped away at Clara's patience until there was little left to give. Still, she soldiered on, convinced that persistence would eventually yield results. Until the day they asked her to oversee yet another critical rollout, for free. "We can't afford to hire extra help right now," Greg, the CEO, explained during a hurried phone call. "This launch is crucial, Clara. We need you to step up, put in the hours, make it happen. Think of it as an investment in the future." An investment. That phrase stung more than anything else. How many times had she heard those exact words? How many nights had she sacrificed sleep, meals, personal plans, all under the guise of investing in the company's success? Enough was enough. When Greg hung up, Clara stared at her phone for a long moment, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about valuing people over profit margins. And suddenly, clarity washed over her like a tidal wave. She realized she couldn't keep giving pieces of herself away, only to have them discarded like trash. That realization marked the beginning of the end. Back in the present, Clara stepped outside the office building, blinking against the bright sunlight. The city buzzed around her, cars honking, pedestrians weaving through crowded sidewalks, skyscrapers towering above like silent sentinels. Normally, she found comfort in the chaos, but today it felt alien, overwhelming. As she walked aimlessly down the street, her mind replayed the confrontation in vivid detail. Part of her wondered if she'd made a mistake, if perhaps she should have swallowed her pride and stayed quiet. But deep down, she knew better. Staying would have meant losing herself entirely, becoming complicit in a system that exploited people's goodwill until there was nothing left to exploit. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket, notifications piling up faster than she cared to check. Emails from coworkers, texts from friends, missed calls from her sister, all clamoring for attention. She silenced the device and shoved it back into her coat, needing space to process everything. Eventually, she found herself sitting on a bench in a nearby park. Children laughed as they chased each other across the grass, oblivious to the world's complexities. A dog bounded past, leash trailing behind as its owner jogged to catch up. Life moved forward, indifferent to individual struggles. Clara sighed, leaning back against the bench and closing her eyes. What came next? Could she really start over at this stage in her career? The uncertainty terrified her, but strangely, it also exhilarated her. For the first time in years, she felt untethered, not lost exactly but free. Free to explore possibilities she hadn't dared consider before. Free to imagine a future where she didn't have to fight tooth and nail for scraps of acknowledgement. Free to demand better, not just for herself, but for everyone caught in similar cycles of exploitation. Free to prove that walking away wasn't failure, sometimes, it was the bravest choice of all. Meanwhile, back at Brightline Tech, chaos reigned supreme. Without Clara's steady hand guiding operations, projects stalled, deadlines slipped, and tensions escalated. The Lumina rollout, once hailed as the company's golden ticket, turned into a disaster of epic proportions. Bugs plagued the system, customer complaints flooded in, and key clients began pulling out one by one. Greg paced his office, panic tightening his chest with each passing hour. He'd underestimated Clara, that much was clear. In his arrogance, he'd assumed her departure wouldn't matter, that someone else could easily fill her shoes. But no one could. No amount of fresh hires or desperate scrambles could replicate the institutional knowledge and leadership she'd brought to the table. By the time the financial reports landed on his desk weeks later, showing a staggering loss of $7.2 million, it was already too late. The damage had been done, irreparable fractures spreading throughout the organization. As Greg stared at the numbers, dread settling like lead in his gut, he couldn't help but wonder, why hadn't anyone seen this coming? Why hadn't he seen it? Little did he know, the answer lay not in spreadsheets or performance metrics, but in the simple truth Clara had tried to convey all along, that people mattered. That treating employees with dignity and respect wasn't just ethical, it was essential for survival. By refusing to acknowledge that fact, Brightline had sealed its own fate. And somewhere out there, miles away from the crumbling empire she'd once helped build, Clara smiled knowingly. She didn't need validation from Greg or anyone else. She already knew she'd done the right thing. Clara sat on the park bench, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The weight of her decision still pressed heavily on her shoulders, but beneath it lay an unfamiliar lightness, a sense that she was finally untethered from the burdens she'd carried for so long. She didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in years, she felt free to seek them without fear or obligation. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her back to reality. This time, she pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Dozens of messages lit up the display, some from concerned colleagues asking if she was okay, others from higher-ups trying to smooth things over with vague promises of reconsideration. One message stood out, a text from her younger sister Mia. "Hey sis, heard what happened. You holding up okay? Call me when you can." Clara smiled faintly. Of everyone in her life, Mia had always been the one person who truly understood her, the one who cheered her victories and held her together during defeats. Without hesitation, Clara tapped the call button. Mia answered on the second ring. "Finally," she exclaimed, relief evident in her voice. "I've been worried sick about you." "I'm fine," Clara replied, though even she could hear the weariness creeping into her tone. "Just processing everything." "Processing what?" "That you stood up for yourself after 20 years of being treated like a doormat? About damn time, if you ask me." Clara chuckled softly. "Leave it to Mia to cut straight to the heart of the matter. It's not that simple," she said, leaning back against the bench. "Walking away wasn't easy. I gave so much of myself to that company, years of my life. And now," her voice trailed off, uncertainty creeping in. "Now I don't know where to go from here." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Mia spoke again, her tone softer this time. "You're allowed to be scared, Clara. Hell, anyone would be. But you're also allowed to be proud of yourself. What you did took guts. Now you get to figure out what you want, not what they wanted from you." The words struck a chord deep within Clara. For so long, her identity had been tied to Brightline Tech. She defined herself by her role there, by the projects she managed and the teams she led. But now, stripped of that title, she realized how much of herself had been buried under layers of expectations and obligations. Maybe Mia was right. Maybe this was her chance to rediscover who she really was, and who she wanted to become. As they talked, Clara found herself opening up more than she had in years. She told Mia about the late nights, the endless demands, the way she'd poured every ounce of energy into keeping the company afloat only to be dismissed and devalued. And as she spoke, something shifted inside her. The anger and frustration that had fueled her resignation began to give way to clarity. She wasn't just walking away from Brightline, she was stepping toward something new. Something better. Over the next few days, Clara threw herself into exploring options. At first, the sheer number of possibilities overwhelmed her. Should she look for another job? Start consulting? Take a break entirely? Each choice came with its own set of pros and cons, and the pressure to make the right decision weighed heavily on her. One evening, as she scrolled through LinkedIn posts and industry articles, a headline caught her eye: "The Hidden Costs of Hustle Culture, Why Burnout is Killing Innovation." Intrigued, she clicked on the article and began reading. It detailed the toxic effects of workplace environments that glorified overwork and undervalued employee well-being, a phenomenon Clara knew all too well. But what struck her most was the final paragraph, which posed a challenge. If we want to create workplaces that thrive, we must rethink our priorities. Leaders need to prioritize people over profits, fostering cultures of trust, respect, and sustainability. Those brave enough to lead this change will shape the future of work. Something stirred within Clara, a spark of inspiration igniting in the ashes of her old career. Could she be one of those leaders? Could she take everything she'd learned, the good, the bad and the ugly, and use it to help others avoid the same pitfalls she'd faced? The idea took root quickly, growing stronger with each passing day. By the end of the week, Clara had drafted a rough plan for her next move, starting her own consulting firm focused on workplace culture and leadership development. She envisioned working with companies to build healthier, more sustainable environments where employees felt valued and empowered. It was ambitious, sure, but for the first time in years, Clara felt excited about the future. Of course, excitement didn't pay the bills. As Clara dove deeper into her plans, practical concerns began to surface. How would she fund this venture? Who would hire her, especially given her abrupt departure from Brightline? And perhaps most daunting of all, how would she convince skeptical executives to embrace change when so many were resistant to even acknowledging the problem? Determined to find answers, Clara reached out to her network. To her surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Former colleagues praised her vision, offering advice and connections to help her get started. A former client even expressed interest in hiring her as a consultant once she launched her business. Slowly but surely, the pieces began falling into place. But not everyone was supportive. When Greg caught wind of Clara's plans, he called her directly, his tone laced with thinly veiled hostility. "You think you can just waltz out of here and start competing with us?" he demanded. "After everything we did for you?" Clara clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain calm. "I'm not competing with anyone," she replied evenly. "I'm helping companies avoid making the same mistakes you did. If anything, you should thank me." The line went silent for a moment before Greg scoffed. "Good luck with that," he muttered before hanging up. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Was she biting off more than she could chew? Would anyone take her seriously after leaving Brightline under such contentious circumstances? But then she remembered the countless late nights, the sacrifices she'd made, the battles she'd fought, and lost, for people who never appreciated her efforts. No, she wouldn't let fear hold her back now. Not when she finally had the opportunity to make a real difference. Weeks turned into months, and Clara worked tirelessly to bring her vision to life. She rented a small office space, designed a professional website, and crafted proposals tailored to potential clients. Along the way, she reconnected with old friends and mentors, drawing strength from their encouragement and wisdom. Slowly, her confidence grew. Her first big break came unexpectedly. A former colleague named Rachel, now working at a mid-sized tech startup, reached out with an intriguing proposition. "We've been having some issues with morale and retention," Rachel explained during their meeting. "Management keeps throwing money at the problem without addressing the root causes. I thought maybe you could help us turn things around." Clara listened intently as Rachel outlined the challenges facing the company. High turnover rates, low engagement scores, and a pervasive sense of burnout among employees. It was a familiar story, one she'd seen play out countless times at Brightline. But this time, she wasn't powerless to act. "I'd love to work with you," Clara said, smiling warmly. "Let's build something better together." As she left the meeting, Clara felt a surge of hope. This was just the beginning, but already she could see the impact she might have, not just on individual companies, but on the broader landscape of work itself. Change wouldn't come easily, but she was ready to fight for it. And somewhere far away, in the crumbling remains of Brightline Tech, Greg stared at yet another dismal financial report, still unable to grasp why everything had fallen apart. He'd never understand that the answer wasn't buried in spreadsheets or performance metrics. It was standing tall, unyielding, and unstoppable, carving a new path forward. Months turned into a year, and Clara's consulting firm, ThriveWorks, flourished beyond her wildest dreams. Word spread quickly about her unique approach to transforming workplace cultures, focusing on empathy, sustainability, and genuine leadership. Companies that had once dismissed her ideas as soft or idealistic began to see tangible results: improved morale, higher productivity, and most importantly, happier employees who felt valued and heard. Rachel's startup became one of ThriveWorks' first success stories, turning their toxic environment into a thriving community where people actually wanted to work. Other clients followed suit, each transformation fueling Clara's passion further. She hired a small team of like-minded professionals who shared her vision, and together they built something remarkable, a movement toward healthier, more human-centered workplaces. One day, while preparing for a keynote speech at a major industry conference, Clara received an email from Mia. Attached was a news article titled "Brightline Tech Files for Bankruptcy Amid Leadership Crisis." Greg's name appeared prominently in the piece, cited as a key figure whose mismanagement led to the company's downfall. Clara read it with mixed emotions, not triumph, but resolve. It wasn't vindication she sought, it was proof that prioritizing profits over people always came at a cost. That evening, standing on stage before hundreds of attendees, Clara delivered her speech with quiet confidence. "For too long," she said, her voice steady and clear, "we've treated employees as resources to be exploited rather than humans to be nurtured. But I'm here to tell you that change is possible, and necessary. When we value people, everyone thrives." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Among them was Rachel, smiling proudly, holding up a sign that read, "Clara changed our lives." As Clara stepped off stage, surrounded by newfound friends and supporters, she felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't just about her, it was about creating a ripple effect of positive change. For the first time in years, she felt whole, fulfilled, and truly alive. And as she walked out into the crisp night air, she whispered to herself, "I did it. We're doing it." Clara's story wasn't just one of resilience, it was a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and conviction. And though the road ahead would still hold challenges, she faced it with unwavering hope, knowing she'd already made the world a little brighter, one workplace at a time.